Thank you so much for joining us for the first of our series, Grief and the Architecture of Belonging. I'm Suzanne Jabour, and I'm here. For me, she's on that side. For you, she might be on that side, or she might even be above me or below me. My wonderful, brilliant colleague, Annie Emprima. And we were having a conversation, the two of us, and realizing how much of an intersection there is between grief and the way we belong at every level. And I think that's part of what we're seeing now at the collective level. But today we're going to zone right in, microscope in, and look at grief at the level of the self. I'm Suzanne Jabour. I'm a grief guide and educator. I work with people to find their own grief path as a coach and guide, and I work with supporters and organizations so that they can support grievers better. My happy place is being on conversations about grief. So this is absolutely where I love to be. And I'm so thrilled to be here with my colleague, Annie Emprima. What would you like everyone to know about you, Annie?
I'm a metaphysical researcher, so I look at trauma from not just a mind or a body, but the whole consciousness of how our trauma can affect our nervous system and how that nervous system isn't just a physical, it also is a metaphysical. So we can have these invisible weights of trauma stones in our body. They become really heavy, and yet they're not visible on any medical radiology lab test. So I look at the weight of trauma from a whole conscious perspective, which by default would be a metaphysical view.
Yeah, so exciting. We're going to start every session with a some kind of exercise to help us get back in our bodies and help that nervous system of ours go. And Annie, you're going to lead that for us today.
I am, because we're working with the nervous system, and almost all trauma impacts the nervous system. Each session that we do, I want to have a little breathing exercise on the front end so that we can regulate and be in a more present space to talk about uncomfortable conversations with regard to our emotions, especially emotions that we historically have been told to ignore within ourselves. When it's a loss of a loved one, there's certain protocol, but our culture doesn't really honor the conversations that we're going to be having in this series to the depth that we truly need. So we're going to start each session with a short breathing exercise. Today is going to be box breathing, and it's very simple. And we're each going to do it at our own pace because we each hold a 4 count differently. And the way it's going to go is we're going to inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to hold our breath and count in our head 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're going to control exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to hold that empty lungs for 4 count to complete the square. So I'm going to do it with everyone, but please, if your 4 count is shorter or longer, that's okay. We're all, I will be leading it, but that doesn't mean that you need to follow at my pace. So inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to repeat. Inhale on your own count. And then when you're ready, hold. And when you're ready, exhale. And when you're ready, hold again. And we've completed 2. We're going to do one more. And when you're ready, resume your breathing. Okay. So, as I mentioned, grief affects the nervous system, trauma affects the nervous system, and the breathing is going to stabilize our vagus nerve. It's going to slow us down, and when we're slow, it's easier for us to receive information and not be in a dysregulated state. So we want to bring everybody back very slowly. And it's about understanding and being connected to our body, because these conversations about grief really impact our body. And we want that somatic respect that our mind develops as we go through these layers of belonging, the awareness that we have between our mind and our body. So talking about that, Suzanne, you've been through a lot. And would you be willing to share some of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. What I have been through is really the grief, the type of grief that we're talking about today, which is the type that we have, I think as a collective, we have the most of a handle on, right? It's the losses at the personal level. I come to this work after the death of my son. He died in September of 2020, and he was 22. And that loss, even though, I had experienced the death of my dad when I was in my early 30s, so far too early for my liking, my mom when I was in my mid 40s, also too early for my liking. So even having experienced those close losses, there was something about the death of a child that really was a rupture in my life that I wasn't prepared for. And even though I'd had many other losses, I didn't understand grief enough to be able to do it the way that I wanted and to be able to ask for the support that I needed in the way that I needed it. So that loss really is what has led me down this path of becoming a grief guide and educator, because those losses that happen to us personally, when we allow ourselves to really experience them, to really live them, I knew I wanted, as a matter of survival, the fullness of that experience. So, all of the horror, all of the despair, all of the love, all of the hope, all of the growth, I wanted all of it. And I made that decision really intentionally because I knew for me, if I didn't embrace it all, that was going to create the kind of trauma that you're talking about. And I've had so many people say to me, "Oh, you must have been so traumatized when your son died." And I think because I made that decision to embrace it all,
Yeah,
I
to
didn't
feel.
feel traumatized by that. Now, we know not all grief brings trauma, but all trauma has grief. So the
Yes.
two are so intrinsically linked. And what I love about what we're doing in this series of conversations is, for me, when I really embrace that grief on the personal level, I was able to see those concentric rings that we're going to explore, where I could see it happening in households. I could see it happening in community. I could see it happening in the nation, in the world, in these bigger collectives, and even at the systems level. So that's part of why we wanted to start in this place. It's my lived experience. I know most of us who are here probably have a lived experience of the loss of a close loved one. Whatever the title of our relationship with there is, that's less important than how intrinsic they were in our lives. And when we start to really understand that grief and how denying it really sets us up for all kinds of responses that we don't want, then we can start to expand our understanding. Okay, if that's how it works on the personal, how does it work on those concentric rings of belonging? And how does it impact our ability to stay connected? Because I firmly believe that part of what we're seeing right now, this disconnection, this isolation, the fractures in our culture, are because we're all carrying so much unexpressed grief and trauma. And if we understood that and embraced that, we could connect with each other across ideological divides as humans. And that is also, for me, part of why these grief conversations are so important.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's hard for us to name it if we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We're in a society of, oh, just keep moving forward. not only are we not naming it, we're dismissing it to the point that it's creating conflict in our own body. So Suzanne, when you first heard the news about your son, where did you feel that in your body?
That's such a great question. I literally could feel it in my chest,
Sure.
like that all both cracked apart and constricted at the
Yes.
same time, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like when your body can feel something cracking apart, it like all the systems band together to be like, no, no, hold it together, hold it together, hold it together. And I knew that that hold it together was not going to serve me. I was so crystal clear this time that all of our ways of navigating grief, where we want to deny it, we're supposed to get over it, we put all those big emotions in a box someplace and pretend they're not there. Like that, I literally could not survive that. I knew that was not survivable. So I really had to make a decision to be paying attention as much as I could at any time because you're also overwhelmed with all the things to what was really happening. For me, I knew I had to be aware of the emotional field.
Yeah.
And I knew enough to know that that emotional field was tied to my body. And that if I could tend the emotions, then I would at the same time be tending my body. Because I didn't have the same somatic understanding then that I do now about how this really impacts our body. But I knew if I could be taking care of the emotional, that was the best I could do to protect my body. And that was probably pretty
Wow.
wise for where I was. Um, and really, I think has helped me not end up with, malignancies and with, autoimmune disorders or any really uh, levels of dysfunction in my body other than sort of our normal day to day. We're both getting over the flu coldy thing that's going around. That kind of stuff. Yeah, that just still happens. But the systemic shutdown and the systemic things that we see happening in people with this unexpressed grief and trauma, I was really clear that wasn't going to be my story. I was like, I'm not getting cancer from this. I'm not getting some autoimmune thing from this. I am doing this in the most healthy way I know how, and I'm going to continue to figure that out.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I've worked with medical professionals. And when I first started doing this work, I wasn't as confident as I am now. I didn't have as much research, as much data. And I would have doctors, I would say statements like fibromyalgia is grief. And they would like give me the biological background of fibromyalgia. And yet, from the metaphysical trauma research work that I do, I have yet to meet someone that has fibromyalgia that isn't carrying chronic, complex grief. So when we start to clear that grief at the mental health level, the symptoms subside, and reconcile. And and if we could take a little bit of time to talk about that, how it sits in the body, and it doesn't sit in the body for the same. 5 people could experience the same sequence of events that create the same events of grief and have 5 different ways to express it. So someone
Mm-hmm.
might have respiratory, asthmatic response. Someone might have anxiety. Someone might get fibromyalgia. It's really such an algorithm of experience of what we've inherited, what we've experienced, how our brain processes information. It's a really beautiful algorithm that I still have not perfected. Maybe one day I'll have my my math formula for it. But right now I understand that everyone's going to respond uniquely to fight, flight, freeze, and so on. And those that go into freeze with grief are going to have a much more difficult time processing that grief than those that use some other method to move through it and then move out of it. Um, in in shame, sometimes we have grief. We'll have entangled emotions with grief,
Mm-hmm.
grief with anger, sure, grief with but we can get grief with shame. Sometimes
Yeah.
like survivor's grief,
Mm-hmm.
grief of I should have done better. I should have saved my battle buddy. I should have made this one action faster, quicker. And we come back with, at least from the veteran's perspective, with a heaviness of the coulda, shoulda, woulda,
Mm-hmm.
which sits very differently in the body as well. And it's it's a different weight for everyone. So like you were aware enough when you were going through a very difficult point to move through it.
Mhm.
But many people in our society were not taught to sit through that discomfort.
No.
It's very much a run from the discomfort. The discomfort is the becomes the enemy. Do you have any insight, any advice for the audience on sitting in that discomfort of grief?
Absolutely. I think the most critical thing to me for people to understand is that when we think about grief, especially those big griefs, right? The big losses of loved ones that are an intrinsic part of our lives, we are mostly scared of getting stuck. That's
Yeah.
what I hear from grievers over and over. Oh, but I don't want to get stuck. I don't want to get stuck. I don't want to get stuck. The reality is we get stuck when we're in denial. We get stuck when we're resisting.
Yeah.
If we are able to find safe spaces or be that safe space for ourselves, because frankly, at this point, there's not a lot of safe spaces out in the world. We have to be that safe space for ourselves. If we can turn and face those big emotions and learn to name them with a nuance beyond sort of what I call the sad, mad, glad trifecta, which is way too surfacey to be doing any kind of body somatic energetic health stuff. If we can use a feelings wheel is great. Feelingswheel.com is my go-to one. It's fabulous to just really get to the nuance. I'm
Yeah.
really sad. Okay. But is that sadness because I'm tired, or is that sadness despair? Is that sadness disappointment? Is that sadness frustration? And you can hear just from moving from, oh, I'm so sad, there is a whole wealth of information under that. That when we learn that if we turn to look at it, if we welcome that grief as the most unwelcome guest that won't leave the party, we can name that emotion, energy in motion, emotion, then is able to move just by naming it. We
Yeah.
know it moves. There's a whole lot more we could do with it. But if this feels scary and new, just finding the name will allow it to move. And what we ultimately want is to be kind of navigating this river of emotions, is the best way that I can think of it, where
Oh,
they're all in the river and they come to us, we feel them, and they flow on by. Then they don't get stuck in our body. But if we are all, I talked about my heart kind of and my chest cracking open and then constricting to hold itself together. If we're still in that constriction and we're denying what is true, that's when we get stuck. And that's when I think the things that you're talking about, those trauma stones, that weight, the different biological responses, which is just our body trying to protect itself. It's trying really hard to be safe, right? Our brain wants to keep us safe. Our body wants to keep us safe. The safety is in the naming and
oh,
in
for
the
sure.
allowing of all of it to be all right.
And Dan Siegel coined "name it to tame it."
Yeah.
If we can name it, is that the magic wand? No, but naming it, it certainly gets us out of freeze. Then at least we can
Yeah.
take an action, but we can't take an action if we're stuck in freeze.
No. And that to me is the beauty of the naming, right? It keeps us in action. So then we can be curious. We can be looking at what other skills we might want to develop. We can be looking at who might we be able to talk to? Where could we get resourced? But if we're stuck in freeze and we're just like, trying to hold it off with our Wonder Woman bracelets,
Yeah.
it's not going to work. Then we're just
And
stuck.
it's where we get stuck in the timeline. So when people say I'm stuck and we watch, my father, when my father divorced my mother, it was ugly. And there was so much grief, and his grief and anger were entangled deeply. So
Mm,
in his grief, it expressed his anger and it internalized. He never left 1992.
mm,
He passed away 3 years ago, but he never left 1992. He was stuck in time and so resistant to feel the emotions, to name it, to move through it, that his body moved forward and started deteriorating prematurely because he would not move out of the emotions that he was feeling. And that even in back in that time when I was much younger, much younger, I knew that wasn't healthy. And
Mm-hmm.
yet so I see so many people unwilling to come out. And I shouldn't say unwilling, because sometimes people are trying really hard to come unfrozen, so to speak,
Yeah.
to not be an ice cube in time. But it's the unwillingness to feel. So
Yeah.
once we're willing to feel, we have to move through that scary, sometimes super scary act of feeling it. And I've heard with some of my clients that have gone through a lot of of grief trauma, they feel like when they go to feel it, come out of freeze into feeling, it's going to come at them like such a tidal wave that they're going to drown in their own sorrow.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes really important to have a safe container,
Mm-hmm.
the safe person that has the qualifications, that has the background, and that has the constitution to sit in the pain with the person, the enlightened witness.
Yeah.
That was Alice Miller's term, the enlightened witness, to sit. Because in my own personal experiences, I went through a lot of miscarriages, and my ex-husband would dissociate. So I
Mm.
went through this grief alone, watching someone play video games as a way to cope. And it was this like betrayal grief, because
Mm-hmm.
emotions are almost always entangled.
Yep.
And so I internalized it because I had nowhere to put it. I didn't have a lot of choices. You were talking about support. I didn't have choices of where to put that grief and who to talk to about. And I couldn't put the language to it to even go seek out a therapist to say I'm feeling grief. I didn't have the language. I couldn't name it. And
Yeah.
so it internalized into my hip flexors, every
Mm.
miscarriage, everything that had to do with reproductive, where I felt like a failure. Even in my pregnancy, I couldn't breastfeed. And there was a grief in that, like I couldn't have that exchange with my child. And all of that grief settled into my hip flexors. And this is where my metaphysical research trauma comes in, is sometimes we are experiencing symptoms that seem so unrelated that it's never a thought to the medical professional to say, could this be trauma? My 15-year wheat flour allergy was because there was so much grief in my digestive system, it could not process complex food. It couldn't, heavy sugars, it couldn't, anytime I ate too much red meat, my system was so overloaded with the invisible weight, it could not move nutrition through my body effectively. And I didn't learn that until I did a macro psilocybin event. And in it came, it was like showing me all this grief, and I'm crying and all this stuff is happening. And then it said to me, go eat the cupcake.
Mm.
Okay, like, we are taking your grief, go eat the cupcake. And it clicked of, wow, how our body expresses grief. And for me, it denied me of foods that brought me joy.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. So in these conversations of grief, I'm hoping that we new perspectives to bring new perspectives to people to understand that we need to zoom out just a little bit and look at grief very differently, at least from a different angle of observation, to see how it's really impacting us,
Mm-hmm.
and to go back to naming it, to be able to put language to what we're feeling so that we can move forward.
Yeah, I love that idea so much because I think that's where so many of us get stuck. As a culture, as a collective, we're so scared of grief, right? Because it's tangled with death, which we're also scared of. I don't understand either of those, but it's a very normal thing.
Yes.
And because we're scared of it, we don't want to talk about it. And we don't want to label things grief either,
Mm-mm.
because grief is this big, scary thing. And I sort of only semi jokingly say to people all the time, well, the answer to every question is grief. Like, well, why do I feel this way? Grief. Why am I so tired? Grief. Why is my stomach upset? Grief. Why are my muscles weak? Oh, it's probably grief. Like, really? If we could understand that grief happens for every loss,
Mm-hmm.
change brings loss, loss brings grief.
Yeah.
We're experiencing grief on small, tiny levels that don't rupture our life, like the death of a child, regularly. And
Yeah.
what becomes possible when we understand that? And that's why I'm so excited about this series of looking at like, where are the griefs that we're not calling that? When we expand out from the self, where are those griefs that we're not calling that? Because if we know their grief, we know what to ask for. And
Yeah.
the universal need of grief is to be witnessed.
It is, whoo,
That's
that's it to be said again.
every grief will be different.
Yeah.
Every loss will bring some kind of different experience, but the universal every single time is that grief needs to be witnessed.
Yeah.
So you have it's literally a matter of survival that you find those safe spaces. And if you're a person who can sit with someone who's feeling big emotions and not go into, fix it mode, that can just sit there and hold it with them, that's your offer. People say to me all the time, I don't know how to support this person. My friend Sally just called because her mom died. What do I do? Okay, are you a practical person or are you like you could sit with the emotions person? Great. Do either one of those. Most people don't do both. It's interesting when I look back on the people that supported me the ways that I needed. Most people didn't do both. I had my like practical support people and I had my emotional support people. But when we live in this culture of fear and lack of understanding and, poor grief literacy, ignorance around the topic, we're not great witnesses. And when you want to show up as a witness to someone like me who's a grieving mother grieving out loud, I'm a big first assignment. I am not a good first assignment. But if we could sit with each other and be honest about, oh, I lost my job, our gut instinct as North Americans anyway is to go to cheerleader mode, right? Oh,
Yeah.
it's their loss. Oh, there's something better around the horizon. Oh, let me pull up Indeed, let's find you some things to apply for. Though that's all great. But what if first we said, wow, like you've been there for a long time and I know you really like the people and I know that job is a big part of your identity or whatever the truth is.
Mhm.
And I bet you must have some feelings about that. Like, do you want to talk about that? Do you want to just vent that out? Like, because I'm here to listen if you do.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
shifts everything. If we can create those safe spaces to have conversations about our big emotions, we can keep them moving. We can stop them from becoming malignant by just allowing them and having that be normalized conversation. That's my cathedral project, right? That we would talk about grief as normally as we talk about how excited I am that the next season of Bridgerton comes out on the weekend. But what if we had these honest conversations about what's really going on in our emotional worlds and connected that way? That's our human to human, heart to heart connection.
Yeah. Yeah. The nervous system, I have a particular set of skills,
Mhm.
metaphysically speaking, that allows me to feel someone's nervous system. And so often it's this exhale that comes in the nervous system when not the mind, but
Mm-mm.
the nervous system is witnessed. Oh, you see me, you feel me, you're honoring my pain. And and so when I'm meeting with clients, it's sort of from a metaphysical view, equivalent to family therapy of the internal, the mind, the body, the nervous system, the superconscious. And the nervous system consistently has an exhale of, you see
Mhm.
me, you see me. And I don't need to have a whole lot of words. I just need to repeat what the nervous system is asking me to repeat of,
Yeah.
you see me. And that allows movement in the body.
Yeah.
Really powerful. And sometimes the you see me is a friend just putting their hand on another friend and being silent with them. That is also a form of, you see me.
Mhm. And that breathing exercise, like we did at the beginning of the session, the box breathing, that's a way we can tell our own nervous system that we see it.
Yeah.
Like I feel your dysregulation. I feel how fluttery I'm not sure we all know how to feel dysregulation, but for me, it feels like either freeze, like I'm either completely shut off. That's one version of dysregulation, or it feels all fluttery. or it feels like, my brain is just popping all over the place. When we feel that, if we can be saying to our own nervous system, oh, I see something is not quite the way that I would like it to be. And I'm going to pause. I'm going to take this minute. Like, how long did it take us to do 3 sets of box breathing? It's less than a minute,
Yeah.
right? It's maybe 30 seconds. And that allows that, that
Yeah.
sigh of release. It's not going to be to the level of working with someone like Annie, but it can help us as we're talking about get out of freeze so that we can be in movement and we can be finding resources. We can be figuring out what skills we need. We can reach out to a friend and say, hey, we don't have these conversations about our emotions, but I'm really feeling some big stuff right now. And I really need a safe place to talk about it. Would you like to do that with each other? We can set up those agreements. We can reach out to each other. We have to be brave and courageous and bold and a little bit uncomfortable and messy. But that's okay. We're here to be brilliant and messy simultaneously at the same time, all in a big tangled mess. That's the human experience.
Yeah. Yeah. The human experience. And I want to go back to that because I need to do a shout out for you too. As a grief educator, I can be a little bit intense for people. For the nervous system to feel, for me to feel the nervous system and the nervous system to be felt. I'm step 2 in the process.
Mm,
You would be step 1 of let's have the conversations first. Let's show the nervous system that it's safe to have these conversations. Um, and then go deeper. And it's important for us to have that, go back to that education, to be able to have the understanding and the awareness of what's happening. Because
yeah,
outside of freeze, we have flight, and then we go into dissociation and escapism. And okay, let's parachute back into the parasympathetic and settle back in to honor and to respect the process of moving through grief. But now the caveat is that some people go into grief and that becomes their grief story and they never step out of grief.
yes.
It becomes their identity. And in the losses that we recognize, it's also what we'll be talking about next week quite a bit. But to give a little bit of a step into that, not knowing who we are after we lose someone, not knowing what happens, that uncertainty can be really scary.
Yeah. And that's the layered secondary losses, right? That layer on top of, yes, my son died. And I remember thinking so clearly, sorry, we're both getting over this flu. My vocal cords are protecting themselves with mucus. That's not very helpful. I remember thinking not long after Ben died, okay, so my son died, so that's a massive loss. I was very clear that I was no longer the person that I was before that happened, so I don't know who I am. And my brain fog was so intense and I was ignorant. I didn't know that was a normal thing, the grief brain. That I actually thought I had some kind of instant onset brain disorder
Oh, sure. Yeah.
because it just did not work like at all. And I was talking to my daughter about it the other day because we banded together, we grieved together very differently, but we were a team and we made that very clear with each other. And we had very explicit rules about how that was going to work, shared agreements. And I said to her the other day, did I ever say anything to you about my brain? Because I don't remember ever saying anything. And she's like, no, Mom, you really didn't. I was so scared that there was something seriously wrong with my brain that might be fatal that I
Yeah.
didn't talk to her about it, even though we were talking about everything. And so it's that level of lack of understanding that even as the griever, we don't understand what's happening to us. And it's all normal. And I think for this level of grief that we're looking at today, those personal losses, that's really one of the things that I want people to hear is it doesn't have to, live in your body forever. There are things we can do to help that not be the case. And whatever symptoms you're having, whatever emotions you're having, whatever is happening to you is normal. It's just that we don't live in a culture where anybody ever told you.
Yeah.
So if you can give yourself that okayness, like I just had to be very much like that Buddhist sense of okayness, I had to really be okay with everything. The good, the bad, and the ugly, the horrifying, the all of it. I had to be okay with it. And I knew for me that was a matter of survival. That's how I was going to not have the story of a grieving parent that curls up in the corner and never functions again. I want to circle back to the identity piece though, too. And I know that's what we're going to talk about next week. So a little bit of a teaser. But I actually had someone say to me, oh, maybe a year after Ben died. They might have given me a year, which is pretty typical that other people will be like, oh, you get a year, but then you're supposed to be over it. And I was writing a new bio for some talk that I was giving, and I sent it to her for feedback. And I say in the very beginning of all of my things, I'm a grieving mom, turned grief educator, speaker, author. And she said to me, well, how long are you going to be a grieving mom? Aren't you done with that yet? I was like,
It's different when it's your child.
I'm still a grieving daughter. Like, I can be that and have that as a piece of my identity,
Yeah.
but it is not my whole identity. And that to me is the goal,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to carry these griefs with me. I want to, if grief is the flip side of love, I want to have that love. So that means I have to have the grief too. That's okay. It's not overwhelming. It doesn't consume my every moment, but a piece of me, a piece of my identity will always be grieving mom.
Mm. I want to talk about that for a minute because from a metaphysical perspective, when we give birth to a child during pregnancy, we are constantly exchanging cells.
That's literally a piece of me that is no longer walking the earth.
Yes, literally, like
Literally.
biologically, literally, a piece of you that is not walking the earth, and which is a grieving of the self and a grieving of the son of your son.
Yeah.
It's a dual grief.
Yeah. And I was very aware of that too. I was like, well, that's like a literal part of me that is no longer here, that I can no longer touch, I can no longer interact with.
Exchange with energetically.
Yeah. Because you are, our birth relationships, we have that energetic connection regardless of anything that happened after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even for those that were in abusive or dysfunctional
Mm-hmm.
relationships with their parents or children, it still exists at the undercoding of our existence, the below the traumas, below the emotions, below the human experiences is the electricity of our experience.
Yeah.
That undercode, that exchange exists in the undercode. So it's a connection that exists no matter how deep the atomic bomb above might be,
Mm-hmm.
still exists. And that's another conversation of grief that we can talk about next week.
That ties perfectly into next week. Yeah, and if you have any questions, I know Annie feel free to pop them in the chat box. If you want to unmute yourself, we're coming to the end of our conversation. We're so grateful to you for joining us today. If you were here live and if you're watching the recording, thank you, thank you, thank you for joining this conversation, for wanting to know more, understand more about these important, critical issues, especially in this moment in our shared history. Next week, as we said, we're going to stay with the self for one more week, and we're going to talk about those secondary losses that we spoke about a little bit today. So that loss of identity, that loss of, your sense of yourself in your spheres, and sort of all of those additional layers of ways that grief shows up in the self, that are tied to these personal losses and outside them as well. So that's what we're up to next week. We would love for you to join us. If you registered, you have the Zoom link. It's going to stay the same. So you can hop on, same spot, same time, same bat channel, as they would have said. I'm aging myself. Oh my gosh. And we'd love to leave you with a question to ponder between now and then.
So earlier I had talked about the weight of grief. And for those that are watching, think about the grief you may have experienced in your life. And if you could create a tangible weight, it can be something like pounds, liters. Maybe it's something of size like the weight of a marble, the weight of a brick, the weight of a cinder block, the weight of a boulder. So an item or some metric unit, where does it sit in your body and how much does it weigh? And feel free to put that in the comments or feel free to journal about that. When we are aware of the weight it's carrying, it's a whole lot easier for us to know which tools we need to help lift it out of the body. And so that's the question for this week. Where does grief sit in your body and how much does it weigh? The two-part question. But for those that want to have a reflection as well, ask the question, what part of me did I lose along the way? And then we will see everyone next week.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you then.